By that evening, Margaret's morning meltdown had gone viral in the neighborhood social media groups. The video Mr. Peterson posted was titled Karen vs. Cardinal Cafe and had already been shared 47 times. The comment section was brutal. Is she for real? Poor Mrs. Chen just lost her husband. Someone needs to investigate who gave this woman authority over anything. Margaret sat in her living room, laptop balanced on her knees, furiously typing responses to every comment. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she defended her position with the fervor of someone who'd never been wrong about anything in her life. Gerald, she barked toward the kitchen. Did you send out the emergency board meeting notices? About that, Margaret. Gerald appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. Tom Richardson called. He said the other board members want to discuss some concerns about your recent enforcement actions. Margaret's perfectly penciled eyebrows shot up. Concerns? What concerns? I'm literally the only person in this neighborhood who cares about property values. The emergency meeting was held in the community center, and Margaret arrived 15 minutes early with a binder full of printed photos, HOA covenant excerpts, and what she called her evidence folder. She changed into her most authoritative outfit, a navy blazer, sensible heels, and the pearl necklace her mother had left her. But something felt wrong the moment she walked in. The other 4 board members were already there, whispering among themselves. They went quiet when they saw her. Good evening, everyone, Margaret announced, setting her materials on the table with practiced efficiency. I trust you've all reviewed the documentation I sent regarding the flagrant violation at 42 Maple Street. Tom Richardson, who'd been HOA treasurer for 8 years and had the demeanor of someone who'd rather be literally anywhere else, cleared his throat. Actually, Margaret, we called this meeting to discuss a different matter entirely. I beg your pardon? We've received several complaints, said Linda Walsh, the secretary, not meeting Margaret's eyes, about your conduct as president. The harassment of Mrs. Chen, the intimidation tactics, the unauthorized fines you've been levying. Margaret's face flushed red. Harassment? I'm enforcing the covenants that we all agreed to uphold. Mrs. Chen's bird feeder is clearly oversized, and if we don't maintain standards... Margaret! Tom interrupted gently. We measured it ourselves. The bird feeder is 11 inches tall, well within compliance. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. That's impossible, Margaret whispered, but even as she said it, she remembered the morning's chaos. Had she been holding the measuring tape upside down? Had she been so angry that she'd misread the numbers? Furthermore, Linda continued, pulling out her own folder, we've discovered that several of the fines you've issued over the past year were for violations that don't actually exist in our covenants. The Hendersons' garden gnome, the Johnsons' holiday lights, Mrs. Patterson's wind chimes. None of those are prohibited. Margaret's carefully constructed world began to crumble. But the property values, the neighborhood standards. We're calling for a vote of no confidence, Tom said quietly. Effective immediately, we're suspending your authority to issue violations or fines, pending a full review of your actions as president. As Margaret sat there, surrounded by the people she'd thought were her allies, she realized that her crusade for perfect neighborhood compliance had turned her into the very thing she'd been trying to eliminate, the problem neighbor. But Margaret Thornberry wasn't the type to go down without a fight. As she gathered her materials and headed for the door, her mind was already racing with plans for revenge. If they wanted to play hardball, she'd show them what real enforcement looked like. After all, she still had copies of everyone's personal information, access to the HOA's social media accounts, and a very detailed knowledge of which neighbors had been bending which rules. The war for Willowbrook had only just begun. Margaret Thornberry stood on her manicured lawn at 6:47 am, clutching a measuring tape and screaming at her neighbor's modest bird feeder. 14 inches, she shrieked, her voice carrying across the entire Willowbrook subdivision. The covenant clearly states 12 inches maximum for decorative lawn fixtures. She was wearing a pink bathrobe, colors in her hair, and had somehow managed to apply lipstick before this dawn raid. because appearances mattered, even during property disputes. What made the scene even more absurd was that Margaret had dragged her husband Gerald out of bed to serve as her witness, and he stood there in his underwear and dress shoes, holding a clipboard and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. The bird feeder in question, a simple wooden house that sweet Mrs. Chen had put up to attract cardinals after her husband passed away. But the real kicker came when Margaret whipped out her phone and began live streaming to the neighborhood Facebook group. This is what happens when people think rules don't apply to them, she declared to her audience of 12 viewers, most of whom were probably watching in horrified fascination. Margaret had been the self-appointed guardian of Willowbrook's HOA regulations for 3 years, ever since she'd moved in and immediately noticed that the previous HOA president was too lenient. She'd run unopposed, mainly because no one else wanted the job, and had since turned the position into her personal fiefdom. Her campaign against Mrs. Chen's bird feeder had started small. First, a polite email about community standards. When that was ignored, she'd escalated to formal violation notices. Mrs. Chen, bless her heart, had responded with a plate of homemade cookies and an explanation about how the birds reminded her of her late husband. Margaret had thrown the cookies away. Gerald, document everything, she commanded, marching toward the offending bird feeder with the determination of a general storming a beach. I want photos, measurements, and timestamps. This ends today. Gerald fumbled with his phone, accidentally taking a selfie instead of photographing the bird feeder. Maggie, maybe we should. It's Margaret, and no, we shouldn't. Rules exist for a reason, Gerald. If we let one person slide, the entire neighborhood will descend into chaos. Next thing you know, people will be painting their houses whatever color they want, parking boats in their driveways, having garden parties without permits. She pulled out her phone and dialed the HOA hotline, which was actually just her own voicemail system she'd set up to seem more official. This is HOA President Thornberry reporting a Code 7 violation at 42 Maple Street. I need an emergency board meeting scheduled for tonight. Mrs. Chen appeared at her window, coffee mug in hand, watching the spectacle with the patience of someone who'd lived through much worse than an angry neighbor in a bathrobe. Mrs. Chen, Margaret called out, waving her measuring tape like a weapon. You have exactly 24 hours to remove this unauthorized structure, or I'll be forced to recommend eviction proceedings to the board. It was at this moment that Margaret's bathrobe belt chose to come undone. And that's when she noticed her elderly neighbor, Mr. Peterson, had been recording the entire encounter from his porch, grinning like he just won the lottery.